And with that, I'm really excited about tonight's event. I don't know if I've ever had the opportunity to invite a coworker to speak at one of the Downtown Orlando UX events. But Amy is somebody that I work with at Sprout Social. I'm wearing my hat today, just out of solidarity for Amy. When I shared about our previous volunteer for one of our talks, Amy reached out and offered to share a talk that she's been paid to present at conferences all around the world, in Mexico recently. And I'm so grateful that she's sharing this topic with our community. And so she'll be talking to us about embracing neurodiversity in your teams and what the benefits are, and she'll be sharing her story as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amy.
Cool. Hi, folks. I've been a creative my entire life. I picked up a paintbrush at the age of 5 with a set of paints from my grandpa, and I was designing elaborate duct tape sculptures by the age of 8. And I built a robotic arm out of Legos by 14. I started out as a painting major in college, and all of these paintings in this presentation are my own. I eventually received my bachelor in fine arts in graphic design. And I now have 12 years of experience in the design field. I worked in different roles throughout my career, including graphic designer, visual designer, UI designer, and now senior product designer. I've worked in all types of environments, from startups to large corporations. Notable companies I've worked for have included Motorola Mobility, Allstate Insurance, and now Sprout Social. Let me just make sure that nothing's in the chat, right? You'll tell me if something pops up in the chat, right? Cool. Yeah. So I am a successful young woman in tech. I mentor others on their job searches and am continuing to grow in my ever-changing field. I learn new things every day and seek out challenges to advance my craft. I'm also autistic. When you hear that, how do you feel? What do you think of me now? No matter how you feel, believe me, I've heard a lot of things. Of course, I hear from supportive and empathetic people, but a lot of times I hear other things. I've heard people would never know you're autistic, that they feel sorry for me. I felt the surprise and awe that I could overcome so much and yet feel expectations of me lowering. I felt embarrassment for me, and because talking about such things just isn't professional. I've had people treat me differently or convince themselves that everyone is a little autistic. You see, I've spent most of my life not quite understanding what was in my head. And once I left college, I joined the workforce as a designer, but something was really off. My flame would burn out fast on any given workday, and I'd spiral. I'd attend company events and conferences to network and end up panicking in the bathroom. I'd present my work, then go home and cry. I got evaluations highlighting that I talk over people and that I don't appear to show enough gratitude. I once received a list of all the reasons why I wasn't a good fit for the company. They said my facial expressions were odd or inappropriate when surprised or stressed, that I was way too intense, and that I went off topic too often with clients. All of these things were humiliating, frustrating, and sometimes scary. What was making me act this way? Was I broken? Where was the disconnect? I went to doctors on and off, but never quite got answers that fit, and honestly, I just thought there was no fixing this. In 2016, the political climate in the US had me in crisis. It was to a point that the bigness of worldly issues, in addition to my personal ones, were affecting how I showed up at my job yet again. I restarted my mental health journey at that point to get to the bottom of what was causing my difficulties at work. And that was the year someone finally suggested that I may be autistic. In this talk, I'm going to run through my experience as an autistic product designer in hopes of making change happen in our industry. My goals are to introduce neuro-inclusive practices to tech leadership, but also encourage neuro-advocacy amongst individual contributors. Advocating for yourself and others is so very important in this space, and good mental health practices empower folks to ask for what they need to feel healthy and happy regardless of label. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental disorder on a nonlinear spectrum. It's characterized by difficulties in social interaction, communication, and repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. It also sometimes comes with sensory sensitivities, such as sensitivity to light, sounds, tastes, and textures. My autistic traits include being incredibly blunt and literal, some sensitivity to light and temperature, hyper focusing on special interests, executive dysfunction, and trouble coping with change. If an autistic person reaches their social or sensory limit for the day, they may be sent into sensory overload that can lead to meltdowns. And autistic people are also sometimes avoid eye contact or STEM. And stemming is a form of sensory comfort involving repetitive actions like rocking back and forth, flapping your hands whenever you speak, looking at flickering lights, or even just smelling certain smells. Throughout this presentation, you will hear me use several different terms to describe what I identify as well as how I identify others like me. Autistic describes a person who is diagnosed or who self-identifies as having autism spectrum disorder. Being on the spectrum means someone identifies as autistic. And neuroatypical, atypical, and neurodivergent are all broader terms for someone who identifies with any neurodevelopmental disorder, not just autism. The official diagnostic evaluation for autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is very expensive, even with insurance. It's also a big time commitment where testing itself can take in excess of 8 hours. Even finding a provider is hard since most only specialize in children. The system makes it hard to get something specific on paper, which is why I include those who self-identify. Now, for the longest time, I wondered why people were so resistant to believing I was autistic when I revealed it. Was it because I was late diagnosed and people just didn't associate my behavior with someone with special needs? Was it because they weren't educated on what autism was? Was it because they didn't see me after hours and how my environment was really impacting me? In recent years, it has become very clear that the reason is rooted in the original development of the diagnosis. You see, I identify as female, and the autism diagnoses are male dominated at this point in history. You don't hear about women being on the spectrum very often because the original ASD diagnosis was developed around young boys and how they behaved. People who identify as female are much harder to diagnose because we behave differently and are better at masking or disguising our true nature by mimicking others. We just blend in better. Many autistic women aren't accurately diagnosed until their 30s or never get diagnosed at all. And these autistic women don't get the resources they need earlier in life to be successful later in life. They are set up for failure. When I first found out I was autistic, I didn't believe them. I mean, I was what, 27? Surely anyone would have told me by now that I was autistic. And believe me, those same extreme stereotypes we've all heard I've definitely heard them, and they filled me with these misconceptions that autism uh, was bad, and that it made me afraid that I might lose my job if anybody found out. When I heard autistic, my mind went to the type portrayed in Hollywood, the cisgendered white male who has little capacity for empathy, someone who talked too much or too little, someone who had a superhuman processing or creative skill, but a tragic disposition, someone people felt sorry for. This cliched image of autistic people that society has in its head has made companies worried that we aren't capable of producing meaningful work and value. But in reality, a study run by Harvard Business Review says people on the spectrum are 20% more productive than their neurotypical counterparts. But this is if they're given the right environment and right opportunities. Nothing was changing in my life. I was still me, just atypically labeled. This diagnosis was a good thing. It meant I knew what I needed to bring my best self to work, and it helped me value my mental health above all else. I found that I would not be losing my job. In fact, I gained respect for my coworkers for coming out and verbalizing what I needed to communicate better. I learned that I needed headphones to avoid distraction in the bustling open offices. I needed bulleted lists and action items at the end of every meeting and email because I work best with digestible chunks of information and very task oriented. Uh, Jira is a good resource for me. I allowed myself to take more breaks and took advantage of our company's wellness rooms whenever I felt sensory overload. And more recently, I learned that I thrive in a work from home environment. COVID time work from home protocols really helped my work performance because they stripped away these social barriers that I had in a traditional office environment. And I didn't get distracted as often. And I didn't burn out halfway through the day because of human interaction. I also learned that the reason I'm so good at what I do is because I think in shapes, colors, and patterns. I'm great at using common visual elements to create logical user experiences, and puzzles don't faze me because solving problems is my strength. A recent white labeled project of mine was incredibly modular in concept. Hundreds of banks use this tool to host their rewards platforms. But while other designers struggled to see the potential in the CMS, I was able to wireframe out the entire experience and how it would adapt per individual bank in less than a day. We then used those wireframes over the life cycle of the project to outline the information architecture as well as project timelines with the client. You see, I saw every pattern and possibility immediately, and that increased the velocity of my team. And when I'm passionate about something, I can hyper-focus and move mountains. I once worked at Motorola Mobility. There, I designed for Motorola.com, but more importantly, I worked alongside the industrial designers that created the phones and the first round Android Wear device. I was so proud to be a part of that team. At my following job, I designed an Android-only radio app, and in an effort to lead the company towards the future of music listening and wearable tech, I zeroed in on what I could do to move the needle. Unprovoked, I spent a week-long design sprint researching and translating the app design into a wearable one, in addition to my day-to-day work. I also wrote a proposal to our company's executives highlighting all the reasons why we should go in this direction. The proposal may have been over 50 pages. And you see, at the time, I was such a nerd for wearables that nothing would stop me from sharing my thoughts and pushing forward even if I wasn't prompted. And my journey has taught me that I hack the world around me to suit my needs. It makes me incredibly efficient. I know I struggle with meetings and communication, so I use my design tools to my advantage. I collaborate with other designers directly in my files. I use comments and post-its long after meetings end. And these comments in Figma files help me follow up with further questions, make sure cross collaboration happens, and that I'm not forgetting anything. Now, I've talked a lot about me, and you must be wondering at this point how my experiences with diagnosis and personal growth impact you. Well, I'd like to introduce to you a system that I encourage every design team to adopt. Neurodiversity is a concept where neurological differences are to be recognized and respected as any other human variation. These differences might include those labeled with autism spectrum disorder, ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, and a long list of others. Neurodiversity intersects with all other forms of diversity in this world, and it is astounding to me that at this point in history, mental health is still not at the forefront of every employer's mind when building their company's workforces. Companies cannot be truly diverse without neuro-inclusion practices. So why am I speaking to a bunch of designers? It's not because I myself am a designer. It's because in my experience, quirky neurodiverse people tend to flock towards creative and technical careers. I think this is because of the alternative self-expression in the arts where we can be ourselves and explain things without words. It could be the analytical nature of the tech industry and not necessarily needing to mingle as often when coding. But just because we like those fields doesn't mean we flourish in them. And this problem is only just starting to be addressed as companies see that they need a more neurodiverse culture. Neurodiverse adults are 8 times more likely to be unemployed than people without disabilities. With 15 to 20% of the population being considered neurodiverse in some way, that's a huge talent pool that is being overlooked or not understood. And in an effort to stay on the down low due to stigma and lack of information, 37% of employees with invisible disabilities don't disclose at work. So I bring this number to you because not every neurodivergent person will be open about their disability. It's not their responsibility to disclose at work. It's an organization's responsibilities to create a safe environment where they're comfortable enough to disclose if they need to. Disclosing an invisible disability like autism is an incredibly personal choice. Some people may be scared they won't get hired based on previous experience. Some may just not want others to judge them for their disability. And some people may just be private people. I use my diagnosis as an identity and a catalyst to inspire change. I do this also so other people like me might have more psychological safety in their futures. In the end, everyone has a choice, and more importantly, everyone has the right to reasonable accommodations. I hope to help companies nurture a more neuro-inclusive workplace by focusing on 3 key areas: hiring practices, work environment, and team communication. So let's start with hiring. Take 5 seconds and imagine you have a design job opening. How would you envision your ideal candidate? 5 seconds. Okay, let's start with the basics. You might think of someone who has good eye contact and a strong handshake. An autistic person might not be able to look you in the eyes or might be nervous about human touch. You might think of a candidate who can think on their feet. A neurodivergent candidate might need more time to study before they produce an answer. And you might think of someone with good job experience. That's a big one. However, a neurodiverse individual might have been passed over for jobs in the past for personal quirkinesses in the interview process, or might not have stayed at companies very long because it just wasn't a good fit mental health wise. There might be gaps in their resume. The biggest problem I see with the job interview process is that a lot of times soft skills are the determining factor in whether or not a person gets hired. This puts neurodiverse adults at a huge disadvantage. For companies right now, for many companies right now, if it comes down to two people of equal skill, the one that is more personable and consistent will be hired over a quirky neurodivergent individual. And there are a few different types of companies, and one type are the ones that seek out hard skills. These companies have a production engine approach to design. They need someone with certain hard skills so that they can fill gaps to appease business needs. But this type of job usually leaves little flexibility when it comes to mental health. And soft skills are sought out by companies hoping to elicit a certain company culture, but in doing so, actually hire too many of the same type of employee. So my advice for hiring: ditch old definitions of hard and soft skills. Instead, focus on qualities, attributes, and abilities that map to thriving in your type of culture, the one that you provide your employees. Embrace remote interviewing for everyone because not everybody is comfortable in person. Provide questions and process in advance. This gives folks time to develop complete answers to what you want to know about them and relieves anxiety around being put on the spot. Expand the roles available, so be open to different levels and variants of a similar type of role to get a wider range of applicants, and avoid being incredibly specific because you may be excluding a whole group of people in the process. Invest in long-term growth, knowing that the programs and opportunities you provide your employees will make them leaders in their own right, even if they aren't at the time of hiring. And make accommodations readily available without needing disability disclosure. Make no assumptions and be consistent. Now, on to environments. Inclusive environments are all about what a company can offer its employees and how they work with them to achieve success. When I talk about healthy work environments, I'm talking about it from two different perspectives. The first is from the angle of physical facilities-based recommendations. There are some reasonable accommodations that a company can provide in its facilities that benefit all employees in the long run. Specifically for neurotypical people, these things could include changing out bright light bulbs, eliminating or adding white noise machines for open offices, providing spaces like wellness rooms. Wellness rooms or rescue rooms are combined with mother's room sometimes and can be used for anything from prayer to sensory overload to relaxation after that tough meeting. These rooms are usually dark and secluded, away from the hustle and bustle of the main office. You see, I've used these rooms extensively ever since I learned about being autistic, and open office environments just aren't for me. Dark rooms are my happy place. They help me recenter my thoughts and get me prepared for that next meeting. And the second perspective on environment is all about company policy and how companies can set up things to promote success and growth. Rewriting organizational policies to include protections and flexibility for neurodivergent individuals can't be more important. People with neurodevelopmental disorders are subject to unnecessary judgment and misunderstanding on a daily basis. So take a stance at an organizational level, because it will really help us feel properly supported. So provide wellness rooms. We've talked a little bit about these rooms and how they can improve facilities for those who need them. Treat assistive devices as tools, not crutches. Headphones help bring out the best in some people, not exclude them from office culture. Not every company has work from home options, but if you can, try to instill them. The option to work from home has greatly increased my productivity and work quality and could very well be the future aid in finding and retaining neurodiverse talent. Inclusive planning. Add a disabled person to your environmental committee. The best way to create a neurodiverse culture is to get an idea of someone's real office needs. Create a culture that offers, encourages, and accepts both flexibility but also inflexibility. Frame organizational policies to support neurodiversity, a small task but a mighty one. And remember that disability is part of diversity. Neurodiversity is something that should be included in all diversity and inclusion trainings. And finally, my last bit of advice. Communication with atypical people is less about the act of communicating and more about mindset. Being open to new ways of communicating is essential to a great team. So, because you'll rarely know if a teammate is neurodivergent unless they come out and tell you, treating one another with courtesy and respect is so very important. If a coworker is acting in a way that impedes team success, any coworker, find a way to look at it objectively before giving feedback. And when you do give feedback, give examples and clear next steps. I can assure you no one is trying to hold the team back. Everyone wants to keep moving forward with the team. I find the best ways teams can collaborate is by communicating upfront about team expectations and goals and documenting it in a place that is referenced frequently. Weekly reminders in Slack, team agreements, meeting outlines on Confluence. I suggest having individual documents that outline how each of us like to communicate, when in the day we're at the top of our game, and how we like to receive feedback. And when it comes to design-specific collaboration, I personally yearn for multiple perspectives, but can't always digest them when they're all spoken to me at once. I do best with silent internal comments on my files when I'm presenting and thrive in an environment where I can get my thoughts out in documentation before bringing them to a larger group. So document communication styles. Documentation is your friend. Don't assume everyone collaborates the same. Provide a mentor or buddy for everyone. Moral and growth support would greatly benefit everyone, not just neurodiverse employees. This is a practice that is just, I don't know. There's so many opportunities for mentors in every organization, and I don't understand why people don't take people up on those offers. Don't predefine what success and growth look like. One size doesn't fit all. Never set low expectations because disability is not inability. Avoid calling us inspiring. We may be inspirational, but not because of our disability. And don't fear disability. Get to know us, confront your discomfort, and ask questions. I'm always open to talk and take constructive feedback. So we've talked about what managers can do to build a neurodiverse team. We've talked about healthy work environments and what we can do to improve them. I also gave several ways coworkers can approach communications and be allies to disabled people. Hopefully, this presentation sparks something in you today, and you can go back to your teams with fresh eyes. Find some time to learn more about neurodiversity, even if no one on your team has told you they are neurodiverse. Whenever someone does reveal that they're neurodivergent at work, tell them thank you for your trust and what can I do to support you? And finally, watch and listen when your autistic coworker opens a FigJam file to explain what they're thinking. You might just learn something new. Let's redefine a healthy and creative work culture. Thank you.
Thank you for your trust, not just in sharing within Sprout, but also sharing your message with the world with us tonight. And with that, I think we'll turn it over and ask if anybody, both online and in person, has any questions. I've got a couple of mics here I can pass around. So. Keep an eye on the chat too.
I mean, my name is Marcelo. I want to thank you for your presentation. I learned so much tonight. And I can help to mention your paintings. They translate so much about what you explained, and it's very vivid. The question that I have is regarding the methodologies that design teams use to collaborate and generate ideas, such as design thinking, design sprints, right? Working and collaborating in a space very rapidly. How do you feel about that? If you have any suggestions on how we can improve that?
With design thinking, I think Big Jam has really helped with remote work, but also whenever we're in person. And it's really all about documentation. And when it comes to like sprint work, having lists and guidelines for what is the definition of done, defining that, not being ambiguous, just being straightforward. And I know that's super hard sometimes. We as designers live in a subjective world, but having those guide rails really keeps things on track, not just for neurodivergent people, but for everyone. So maybe it's a matter of doing more prep work before having design thinking meetings, making agenda items and clear portions of the meeting that are devoted to next steps, and making sure there's clear direction. And I think as design leaders, I'm not a manager. I'm a design leader in my own right, but I'm not the person that makes the final call on the scope. But I definitely appreciate those types of ceremonies and that kind of structure. But that doesn't always happen in our field. So maybe that's just something to look out for in the future.
And Amy, I know you had a cutoff around 45 after. Maybe we'll take one more question if anybody has another question. Anyone online? Looks like there is one question from Carter. Amy, do you have any tips for finding a suitable communication and collaboration style? I often feel misunderstood while communicating. Were there any important lessons to learn?
I too often feel misunderstood, but it's more when I'm put into situations where I have to ad lib. Or like come up with things on the spot. Like obviously my presentation is very scripted. It's scripted on purpose because I've worked for months on the content of my talk. But whenever I'm put into work situations, there's these soft skills types of environments that I'm in, and I have to come up with words on the spot to explain my decision making and back up my reasoning. And what has helped me is giving myself permission to step back and take at least an hour, if not a day, to respond back to a person. Taking that time, during that time, you can write something down. You can send it over to your mentor and see what they think. And if it's something that makes sense in the moment, at least on a language level. I think storytelling with visuals is, I mean, we're all designers, like using FigJam as a storytelling device where you walk through your work stage by stage and build in room for feedback from other folks. But like how I find that I don't get misunderstood is whenever I do have that structure and that preparation. And that does take a lot of time out of the day to prepare for these types of meetings. But I feel like that's the type of communication that best works for me.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks again, Amy. This is all very helpful for helping us to see the world through your eyes and hear about your experience and what we can all do to build, more stronger teams through diversity, neurodiversity. So thanks so much for sharing with us and for joining us tonight. And